everyone attending. One small update. I think I must have sent you a slightly old bio there. My wife I've actually just celebrated my 35th wedding anniversary. But the topic for today is ZK-SNARK proofs of solvency, and most of the talk, almost all of the talk, will be devoted to a toy example I put together. I've gotten very interested in this area, both the specific topic and related ones, and I started looking around for, is there a good explanation of these, I can find on the web, either written or video, that explains them in coherent terms so a normal mathematically literate person can understand them. And I didn't find any. I found very complicated advanced mathematics, usually of small pieces of the problem. And I found kind of qualitative explanations that were profoundly wrong in many respects. So I wanted to show a toy example that is mathematically consistent, that produces, that gives all the basic mathematics of how this frankly magical thing happens, but only using fairly elementary mathematics and fairly simple arguments. But I don't want to start there. I don't want to start with the specifics. I want to start with the big picture, what we're really talking about here. We're talking about what it means to be human. That is, most people apply a moral worth to other human beings that they don't apply to other living things or other non-living things. And what is it? Why do we do that? Well, I don't think it's primarily biological. That is to say, if we discovered intelligent aliens and we could fight with them or trade with them or learn from them or otherwise interact with them, I think we would extend this moral status to them. But on the other hand, they could do some pretty amazing things. For example, social insects on Earth build elaborate structures. They farm, they domesticate, they fight wars. And yet nobody thinks, well, I won't say nobody. Most of us don't think twice about stepping on an ant or spraying insecticide on, a hive. We don't think of these things as intelligent creatures. Plants develop forests that are they're more complicated than anything humans ever build, and more sophisticated in many ways. And yet people chop down trees and, pick berries without thinking about it. So my contention is the key here is protocols. If we can interact with things via protocols, then we consider them a higher moral status. We consider them humans. However intelligent and creative they are, if we can't interact with them, if we can't trade with them or fight with them or talk to them, we don't consider them intelligent. And there's one basic divide among protocols. There are decentralized protocols and centralized ones. Language, for example, people learn it on their own. They don't have to go to school. Even people who can't hear or speak learn a sign language. If people meet who don't speak a common language, they invent a pidgin, eventually a Creole. Sometimes it evolves into a whole new language. Writing, on the other hand, is a stripped down form of language. It omits many of the aspects people use to communicate, the context, the gestures, often the voice tones and pauses. There are uncounted thousands of languages in human history. And in fact, every language is bundles of many dialects that are constantly changing. We could even say every person has their own language, their own specific exact dialect and accent. Writing, there's really only a handful of writing systems. And they have rules, right, that are top-down, grammar rules, punctuation rules. And if you go through the list, we have a general idea of fairness that people seem to come up with on their own. And we have laws. And if you look down on the right-hand side, the centralized protocols, this is most of what we call civilization. This is where the progress is made. This is where humans change, where great things are done. But you also notice that these things can be very cold and inhuman, right? Law can deliver verdicts that seem manifestly unfair. Money can lead to transactions that seem, unfair and perverse. Also, the centralized stuff involves a lot of violence. The decentralized protocols are mostly self-enforcing with fairly limited violence. But on the other hand, the decentralized stuff carries a lot of cultural baggage. It can have racism, sexism, it can have religious intolerance, mob violence. It can be very, very hard to move these things out of the decentralized protocols. Centralized protocol, you just pass a law and the law is different. Decentralized, it can take generations to make change. And the conflict between these two things is a central issue in life. It drives a lot of literature. It drives a lot of personal dilemmas people have. It gives rise to an awful lot of worry. But you don't have to fall into this dilemma because there is an out. There is something we can do that gets us everything, the best of both worlds. Whoops. And it's mathematics. Mathematics is more consistent and coherent than the best centralized protocol. And yet it's completely decentralized. Anybody can do mathematics on their own. They can invent their own mathematics for any problem that occurs to them. This is kind of a vague idea I've had as long as I can remember. I didn't put it in these precise terms, but it really seemed to me that mathematics was not just beautiful on its own. Mathematics was the key to resolving what otherwise seemed like intractable dilemmas. But I never really got very far thinking about it. I thought about a lot until I went to college. So I went as an undergraduate, I went to Harvard. And I was really excited to go to Harvard because I got a course catalog and I saw, boy, there are hundreds of, there are all these people. I've read some of their books or articles. I want to learn from them, and they're here, and they have classes, and I want to take this and this and this. But then in freshman orientation, I got kind of a downer. The advisor who was assigned to me looked at the courses I wanted to take and laughed and said, "You can't do this. We got rules, centralized protocol." And I said, "Okay, show me the rules." And he showed me the rules. And I realized it wasn't a centralized protocol. There really were no rules because the only effective rule was that you had to get a faculty member to sign your schedule. So that's decentralized. I can go do that on my own. I find a faculty member and do it. And one guy who I had read a lot of and really wanted to take courses from, and did, in fact, he was my advisor throughout my college career, and I took courses and seminars from him. And half of what I learned there, I would say, came from him and his classes. And he was a guy named Harrison White, and I went to his office, and he didn't teach any undergraduate courses, and so he was sort of surprised to see an undergraduate show up. He didn't know anything about the, signing schedules part, but I asked him. I didn't have to convince him. We didn't talk. I just said, "Well, you should take the courses you want to take. What else is there to say?" So he signed it, and I got to take the courses I want to take. But one thing kind of stands, taught me an awful lot, but one thing that really stands out, and it's appropriate for our discussion today, is he did a study very early in his career as part of his PhD dissertation back in 1960 or so. There are Australian Aboriginal tribes that have some very unusual marriage customs. They're very, very complicated. People can explain what they are. Everybody knows what they are and feels that they are somehow natural and good, but they can't tell you why these incredibly complicated set of rules are applied. And it's very important to them because all property in these tribes is passed down through women. And so a man who happens to get matched up by this complicated set of rules to 3 or 4 wives is rich and socially prestigious and important. And a man who gets matched up to none, which is half the population or more, either has to live in low status and poverty and working for others, or leaves the tribe and goes somewhere else. And in fact, if you leave the tribe and go somewhere else, these rules kind of work to your favor. And if you can find the right tribe, you can find one where there are 4 or 5 wives and millions of dollars equivalent of property waiting for you. And this is the reverse, right? Most social systems with polygamy, it is the rich and powerful men who get a lot of wives. Here, you get a lot of wives by the system, and that makes you rich and powerful. So White studied these rules, and there are hundreds of them. And no anthropologist could make head or tail out of it. And he said, well, you know what this really is this is an 8x8 matrix. And if we put everybody into one of 8 sort of kinship groups, and we apply a few very simple matrix rules, we can derive all of the social rules. And if we look at it from a mathematical point of view, what this seems to be doing is maximizing genetic diversification. And this appears to be a natural adaptation of a population that, because of the harsh environment, lived in relatively small tribes that had relatively little interaction with other tribes. They couldn't use raiding or trade or something to trade women or trade men between tribes very well. They had to force the men, a large proportion of men, to take long, dangerous journeys in search of other tribes where they would have wives waiting for them. Now, this was extraordinarily important to me because this said, okay, you can have these decentralized protocols that accomplish great goals, and they're very complicated mathematically, but people are willing to actually not only accept them for the most important things in their lives, accept them for, wealth or poverty, life or death, reproduction or non-reproduction, and they feel they're natural and good. They don't have to be, you don't have to use violence. You don't have to force them. You just put this protocol. So this was step 1. So this was saying, okay, we can use mathematics to define decentralized protocols that accomplish, are rational and consistent and accomplish very meaningful goals. And we don't have to, embed them with racism or sexism or oppression in the past. But what Harrison White didn't study, or didn't teach me anyway, is how you might create a new one, or how you might change an old one if you wanted to. Well, that epiphany, that road to Damascus moment, came in August 1979. I just graduated. I was going to the PhD program at the University of Chicago in finance, and a Scientific American article by Martin Hellman came out on public key cryptography. And I had what I considered I think what everybody considered at the time, a very good education in information theory and computer science and general mathematics. And no one had ever hinted at the slightest possibility of the magic of public key cryptography. And suddenly they said, here is how we can get self-reinforcing, game theory designed, optimizing behavior, decentralized protocols, and how we can, create them and let people, adopt them and use them. And it wasn't just public key cryptography, of course, it's also the technology. You need computers, they need to be linked up. In those days, that meant DARPANET. It wasn't going to be really transformational socially for another couple of decades until we got mass public adoption of the internet and smartphones and so forth. But the key ideas were there, and they just, lit a fire in me. And then the next year, I was at the University of Chicago, and a guy named Ron Rivest came to give a seminar on mental poker. And this was, an even more direct application of decentralized protocols. And one of the questions I had is, I said, okay, you've told us how to do the card play, the mental poker article. By the way, he wrote this up in an article about a year later, and it's still, both the Hellman article and Ron Rivest's mental poker article are still very worth reading, even though they're, 40 some years out of date. They still very clearly explain some basic concepts, and they're very well written. Ron Rivest also, about 10 years later, went on to put the R in RSA. So he continued to do work in these fields. But anyway, what I asked him is, I said, and we had a long conversation afterwards, how about the money? How can we, not just, play the cards, but make sure that the losers pay money to the winners? And he had been thinking about similar questions. We had a very long, productive conversation, which unfortunately never got to the point of inventing Bitcoin, but it does show you people were thinking about these kinds of things. But today, I want to talk about something else, Ron Rivest's other example. And I'll tell you right away, when he presented this other example, my reaction is, that's a really stupid example. That's a very minor application. It doesn't matter very much. And we have plenty of, centralized protocols that can do a pretty good job of it. Well, I was wrong, but it took me, 35 years or so to figure that out, that this was actually as important an example as mental poker was for the cryptocurrencies. So his example, I don't remember, I don't think he used car companies. I think he didn't specify the industry, but the basic idea is the government wants to know something like the total planned automobile production over the next 12 months. But the companies are not willing to trust the government with the number, nor are they willing to trust their competitors with the numbers or the public. They are, however, willing to trust the government with the total of all manufacturers. So he gave a public key cryptography solution that allowed the government to find out from the car companies the total of all production without getting any information at all about what individual companies were going to do. This is a zero knowledge proof, although that was not the language employed back in 1980. Well, I'm sorry, it's a zero knowledge. It's not a proof. We're not proving what the next 12 months automobile prediction is going to be. We're just summarizing what manufacturers claim. So it's a zero knowledge aggregation of claims rather than a proof of something objective. It was semi-interactive, so it wasn't, and it was, but it was succinct. That is to say, it didn't involve terabyte files being exchanged or anything like that. Very relatively small bits of information were passed around to accomplish it. So it was, an ancestor of a ZK-SNARK proof of solvency. So ZK stands for zero knowledge. That means we're going to prove solvency without revealing any other information to anyone. Succinct means that we are going to use short communications. We're going to use messages, text messages. We're going to use strings of 100 or 200 ASCII characters that can be cut and pasted from a website. We're not going to use huge files sent around. We want it to be non-interactive. Okay, we want you to publish the proof. You can just put the number out, or you can send it in people to messages. You don't have to have back and forth communication for people to believe it. Argument of knowledge. Obviously, they chose the letters there for to get that ZK-SNARK, the SNARK word rather than under the normal use. So an argument of knowledge. The prover knows he is solvent, and the ZK-SNARK proves it to everyone else. And solvency, we're going to say, is cash assets are greater than liabilities. So that's what we want to prove to people. So here's a modern example, and this is the toy example I'm going to talk about. It is deliberately simplified and stripped down to demonstrate all the principles and save us a lot of technical detail. So we're only going to consider the case. There's a Bitcoin custodian. All this company does is customers bring it Bitcoin and it holds it for them. And then if they want it back, it gives them back. And it wants to prove that it's total on-chain ownership of Bitcoin. And I'm sure most people know this, but it's worth saying here that Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies, the evidence that you own something, the ability to transfer it to other people is proven by a private key that you have or a distributed public ledger, a blockchain. most people who own Bitcoin do not own the Bitcoin on chain. They have a piece of paper from some financial institution, or an email or something from some financial institution that holds the Bitcoin on their behalf. They use an application. It might be something like Uphold. It might be like Coinbase. They keep their Bitcoin there. The custodian, the Coinbase or the Uphold or some company like that, they have their assets on chain, or some of them do. But the customer, the ultimate user, only has a claim against that entity. So we're assuming that this custodian puts all its Bitcoin on chain. The entity, the custodian, does not want to reveal its Bitcoin private keys. Obviously, if it did that, the money would disappear, because once you reveal your private key, anybody can transfer the money or the Bitcoin. And it doesn't want to release its customer. It doesn't want to tell people how many accounts it has, what they are. It certainly doesn't want to reveal the identity of any of its account holders. And all it wants to prove is that the sum of the accounts, the money it owes, the liabilities it has to customers, is less than or equal to the Bitcoin assets it has on chain. And it wants to do this without revealing anything else. Now, if you think about it for a minute, I think it was pretty magical. Some of you may be very familiar with this stuff, and you might say, "Oh yeah, I can see how you might do it." But I suggest that for most of us, before having read anything about cryptocurrency, you'd say this is impossible. There's no way. There's no way you can publish a number that proves you're solvent without giving away any other information about your operations. So it should be succinct, the proof should be short, and I'm just saying 1,000 bits. There's no magic, could be 2,000 bits or whatever. It should be something that fits easily in a text message or a cut and paste operation, not a big file you have to transfer. Not interactive. It shouldn't be that people sort of can ask questions and get responses and satisfy themselves that way. And the proof has to demonstrate that the custodian knows a set of private keys on the Bitcoin blockchain with total holdings greater than or equal to the customer deposits. And here's the key. If the custodian does not have that knowledge, if the custodian does not know private keys to the Bitcoin network that meet that criterion, it can't, it's computationally infeasible for it to fake the proof string. And for all of this talk, and in most of public key cryptography, when we say, it can't fake it, what we mean is two things. No known computer algorithm using any normal set of computer hardware could fake the proof string in any reasonable amount of time. It might take 20,000 years with every computer on Earth hooked together using the best known algorithm. But we also mean something else. We also mean that the algorithm that could fake the proof string belongs to the class of NP problems if that is not an empty set. That's a whole other fascinating area of mathematics that I'm not going to talk about today, but if you get interested in this stuff, you're certainly going to delve into it, and many of you are probably already familiar with it. But for our purposes today, it just means that it's something that is practically impossible. That if the custodian publishes a number that satisfies the proof, it is very, very likely, almost unthinkable, that it cheated in any way. Subject to some ways I'm going to talk about, but in a pure mathematical way. It can't just invent a number. I mean, the simplest way to do it would be to generate numbers at random and then check to see if they validated your solvency. But the system is such that that would be too hard a problem to solve in any reasonable amount of time. You'd have to try too many strings before you got one that satisfied. I also want to say, although we're only going to talk about this toy example, we're really just scratching the surface. Go back to the big picture. We're really talking about something much, much bigger than just zero knowledge proofs of solvency. Now, there are many other exciting applications. I'm just using a Bitcoin custodian to keep things simple, but the proofs are actually more valuable for complex financial institutions. it works naturally, with information on distributed public ledgers, with cryptocurrencies, and with things that are, put on the in crypto form. But it can be adapted for all data. And in fact, I think its use cases are really much greater outside of crypto than inside. And think about all the kind of other things people might want to prove. Think of all the other information in the world, questions you want answered for which there is data available, but that data cannot be released to the public because of privacy or proprietary information or secrecy or so on. Wouldn't it be great if we had kind of a internet site you could go to where you could ask any question and get answers, even if those answers required it to go through confidential, secret, or proprietary information, because it could give you the answer without revealing any of that information. So I think this would be transformative. I think this would change lots and lots of things about the world. But not in 2023. In 2023, I will be happy to, if it can, validate some custodians and crypto exchanges and so on. And I should make a disclaimer at this point, both by generic disclaimer that I have many investments and I go long and short all the time, but in particular, I have investment in companies doing and relationships with some companies that are doing precisely this or similar and related things. I'm not giving this talk in hopes that you will all come and do business with these companies. I would like it if a lot of you would get involved in this area. I think it's a very exciting and productive area of mathematics to get into, but you should be aware that I am not totally disinterested financially in these sorts of things. So, okay, so the normal way, the centralized protocol for dealing with this issue is our auditors and regulators. ZK-SNARKs are enormously better. It's no comparison. It's not like there's some trade-offs. They have all the benefits of the centralized protocols, and they're much, much better. They're much more rational. They're much more consistent. But they also have all the advantages of a decentralized protocol, and an institution can make the proof on its own, right? Auditors often refuse to do business with these crypto companies, and they're also not really equipped to do it. Regulators have, typically been more, harmful than helpful in this kind of stuff. So it's, we much prefer something that you can just do on your own. People can accept or not accept as they like, and doesn't require any, permission or legal change or anything like that. So we're going to use three tools, and I assume we're talking, we have in the audience people who, cut their teeth on these tools and have been using them since babyhood, and some people who may not have heard of them or have only heard of them in general. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about them. They're actually all relatively simple things to understand if they're explained, at least at the level of this talk. If you get into the depths of these things, there are all kinds of subtleties and cool stuff. But we're going to use trapdoor functions. So trapdoor functions are easy to compute in one direction, but difficult to compute in another unless you know the secret. Hashing and homomorphic encryption. And these three tools are going to allow us to build our ZK-SNARK proof of solvency. So a simple trapdoor function is multiplying prime numbers. It's easy to find prime numbers, such as 269 and 773. It's easy to multiply them together to get 207,937. But if I give you 2007,937 and don't tell you the prime factors, it's a more difficult job to find them. If someone tells you one of the prime numbers, though, it's easy to verify. So that's what makes it a trapdoor. It's easy to compute in one direction, hard to compute in another, unless somebody gives you the key, in which case it's easy. Now, for 207,937, you could do it even with pencil and paper. You have to, try prime numbers one at a time until you came up to 269, which I think is something like the 63rd or 65th prime. So, it'd take you an afternoon, it'd be tedious, but you could do it. And then there are faster algorithms you could use. You'd certainly do it very quickly in Excel, or Python or something. It would be no trouble at all. But if I gave you, if I picked two 1,000-digit primes, and finding 1,000-digit primes is still easy, and multiplying them together is still easy, and I give you a 2,000-digit prime number, it would be computationally infeasible to factor, with the possible exception someday of quantum computers. But that's another subject, and not one that I think is relevant. So here's the toy example we're going to do. We've got three customers who happen to be named A, B, and C. Each of those customers chose two 3-digit prime numbers. A chose 919 and 587, but nobody but A knows those numbers. A does not give those numbers to anyone that she doesn't trust, not to steal the money. In particular, she doesn't give them to the custodian. What she does is multiply them together and give the custodian the number 539,453. And she gives the custodian 50 Bitcoin. The custodian takes those 50 Bitcoins, puts them on the chain, and communicates back and forth with A. And if anybody wants to, not just A, if anybody wants to pay that balance, pay some of those Bitcoin out to someone else, they have to tell the custodian the private keys. Anyone who knows the private keys has ownership of that 50 Bitcoin. Anyone who doesn't know the private keys, if A forgets the private keys, she no longer owns the Bitcoin. So the account number, that's not the account number, the private keys are the money. This is kind of the essential crypto for many cryptocurrencies anyway, that the number is the money. It's not a piece of gold, it's not a piece of paper, it's not a signature, it's not a fingerprint, it is a number. And whoever knows that number has the money. And B and C do the same thing. So A, B, and C have each deposited Bitcoin with the custodian and has account numbers that they can use to retrieve the money when they want it. The custodian also picked two 3-digit primes and multiplied them together and used them as the public key. So the 222217, that's the BTC public key that everybody knows. And it took the 140 Bitcoin deposited and added 10 Bitcoin of its own, and it put it on chain with Bitcoin. And everybody can see the 222217 and the 150, but they don't know who knows the private keys to that Bitcoin public key, and they don't know what the prime factors of it are. Now, this is not actually how the Bitcoin blockchain works. It does not use prime factorization, but to keep this example simple, I just chose that. So this is our problem. And pay attention, the customer only knows the amounts in green. So the custodian can't use that information in its proof. Everybody knows the public stuff, so the custodian can use that. And of course, the custodian knows the blue and the yellow. All of those can be used in its proof. So the job of the custodian is to take the information, not the green information, but the blue, yellow, and gray information, combine it in some way to calculate a number. When it publishes that number, A, B, and C can say, yes, the custodian is solvent. The custodian must be solvent to be able to compute that number. And it must have more Bitcoin on-chain assets than the sum of its liabilities. Okay, the next thing we got to talk about here is hashing. A hash takes strings of any lengths and converts them to a fixed length string. And hashing is not just used in public key cryptography. Of course, anyone who's done any computer science knows it's a very fundamental tool used, for many, many applications in computer science. Now, good hashes produce a near uniform distribution of output values. Here is an example of a not very good hash. I picked it because it's simple, not because it's a good, but it is a hash. You take any number, you multiply it by pi, you take the fractional part, you multiply it by 997, and you take the integer part. For example, customer A's account number is 539,453. You multiply it by pi, you take the fractional part, you multiply by 997, and you take the integer part, you get 580. So customer A's account number hashed to 580. Every hash is going to produce a 3-digit number. From 0 to 579. Well, I guess 580 depends exactly how you're doing this, but I'm sorry, to 997, from 0 to 997. And the distribution of those numbers will be fairly uniform if the numbers going in don't have some kind of a pattern. But the same hash could work with much longer or shorter strings. You could take, ASCII strings and convert them to integers and so on to do this. Now, it's fairly easy to invert this particular hash. Many hashes that people like are not easy to invert, but this one is pretty easy to invert. But you get a list of all the 6-digit account numbers that hash to 580s. You can't tell which 6-digit account number was used. So if I tell you there's an account at this custodian and it hashes to 580, you can't use that to determine the account number. You can get a list of account numbers it might be, but there's going to be a lot of them. We're going to compute a partial sum Merkle tree. The custodian is going to put all of its assets and liabilities in a tree. So let's start at the lowest node, the leaf node. Each of those leaf nodes represents either an asset or a liability. So the leaf node on the far left, the 580 in green, that is the hash of A's account number. The -50 is A's account balance expressed as a liability because it's a liability to the custodian. Moving one to the right, the 862, that's the hash of B's account number and B's account balance. One more to the right, 739 and -70, that is C's, hash of C's account number and C's account balance. And finally, the 293, that's the hash of the public key for the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin balance. When we move up one level to the middle level, each of the two nodes, they sum the numbers. They sum the balances of the two nodes below them, and they multiply together the green numbers and hash the result to get 661 and -70 and 630 and 80. And then finally, the top node does the same thing. It adds the -70 to the 80 to get +10, and it multiplies 661 and 630 and hashes that result to get 427. This particular Merkle tree proves solvency because the 10, the blue number in the top node, is greater than or equal to 0. So the sum of the assets is greater than or equal to the sum of the liabilities. Next, we're going to send messages to all of the account holders, all the customers, and we're going to give them all the nodes in their paths. So what I've shown at the top, this is the message that A gets. The 580 and the -50, that's A's hashed account number and balance. The 862 and -20, that's the other node that is paired with A's. The 661 and -70 is the node that, the parent node of those first two nodes. The 630 and 80 is the other parent node. And then finally, the last node has the balance that proves solvency. So A has to verify. To verify that the institution is solvent, A is going to verify that 580 is the hash of her account number. She can do that because she knows her account number and she knows the hashing algorithm. -50 is her account balance. She should know that. The 10 at the bottom left is greater than or equal to 0. So the custodian is solvent. She can check the partial sums. -50 plus -20 is -70. -70 plus 80 is 10. And in the top row, she can check that 580 times 862 hashes to 661, and 661 times 630 hashes to 427. So the hash numbers are consistent. Now, in any real application, we do not expect A to be doing all of this stuff, pencil and paper and Excel. I mean, A will have an app that you got from an independent third party or trusted party of some sort, or wrote herself, that will read the string, read the proof string, and ring a bell saying, yes, it's solvent, print a message, this is solvent. But it's a simple program to write. And it's succinct. Even a large custodian with 33 million accounts would only send 51 nodes for A to verify, and the same number for other customers. So we're not sending large huge files around. We're sending messages with a few hundred numbers in them. Okay, there are some specific issues with this toy example that I'm going to cover later. But there are two fundamental issues that apply to everything, apply to everything that uses this general approach. The first is that it relies on user checking, right? The custodian can publish these numbers and send them to users, but if nobody checks them, there's no proof. The reason that's not a huge practical problem is we assume that most of the money is going to be in large accounts, mostly by institutions or very wealthy individuals. And we think those individuals are going to probably check both out of self-interest because they have such a large balance, but also because they have due diligence requirements, they have procedures, they have to do it. It's just part of the reconciliation process. Retail users, small users probably aren't going to check most of them probably aren't going to check most of the time. But if the custodian is cheating, the easiest way to cheat in this system is to just leave some accounts off. You do your partial sub-Merkle tree, but you just leave off, some of your liabilities, some of your accounts. Those accounts would not prove when the custodian sends the message to those customers. And they run their app that verifies it, it's going to say, no solvency. Solvency is not proved. Or it's going to say to them, you have an account balance of 10 Bitcoin when they think they have an account balance of 100 Bitcoin. If the custodian is seriously cheating, it's going to have to leave off lots of these user accounts, and probably sooner or later somebody's going to catch it, and a few people are going to catch it. And once the word gets out that there's doubt, lots of users are going to check it. But it's not a full cryptographic proof in the sense of mathematical proof. It is a impediment to the custodian systematically cheating for large amounts of money for long periods of time. Another problem is the solvency is only proved at a point in time. The custodian could just take the Bitcoin and spend them 1 second after it's computed its proof. This is, it'd be nice if we could get around that, but even so, even with this problem, this is still pretty valuable. What we're really concerned about is not a custodian emptying out the Bitcoin, one night. We're really concerned about institutions that grow, that are insolvent, but hide that fact and grow because they're, reporting unreasonable returns and unreasonable securities and get bigger and bigger and go on for years until when they collapse, it causes a major problem. Also, if somebody does, let's say one day they don't prove solvency. Well, you have a 24-hour-old account of the situation. You have a much better chance of figuring out what happened, recovering the Bitcoin than you would if there were months and months of finger pointing and argument about who did what, where the money was, what money belongs to who, and whoever took it has lots of opportunity to wash it through lots of accounts and hide it. So getting a one-day head start and a clear picture of who's responsible is an enormous advantage in these things. And it would discourage most people from doing it. There are plenty of people who will chisel a little bit if they think they can get away with it for a long time, and to the point where it's obscure, nobody can tell for sure who did it, who would not steal something if an alarm is going to ring in 24 hours that points a finger directly at them. Okay, the second part of this proof is assets, right? We cannot rely on anyone to verify proof of assets the way we can do verify proof of liabilities. Nobody has an incentive to go in and check that the assets are correct. So to verify the assets, a custodian must prove knowledge of the Bitcoin private keys, 317 and 701. Now, if it just revealed those keys, people could multiply them together, go to the Bitcoin chain, and say, yeah, they have 150 Bitcoin as they claim. But if they reveal those numbers, the 150 Bitcoin will disappear soon. So the ZK-SNARK can validate that the private key is multiplied to a private key that has the claimed assets on the Bitcoin without giving anybody information about what the private keys are. Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I tried really hard, I really did, to come up with a simple, short, elementary mathematical proof that would work for this. And I couldn't do it, but what I can demonstrate is the general, a general principle, a general way that's used for a lot of zero knowledge proofs. The basic problem here is that you want to demonstrate that you know a number that has a certain property without revealing it. In this case, you want to reveal that you know two numbers that multiply together to a Bitcoin private key that maps to 150, but you don't want to reveal the numbers. In any case, Bitcoin doesn't use factorization for a private key or for a public, well, either one, for either private or public key. So even if I did have a method that do that, it wouldn't actually work for Bitcoin. Any kind of algorithm, ZK-SNARK algorithm is going to have interfaces that work with the different ways, different blockchains, protect their information. So I regard that kind of as a technical detail. As long as we can demonstrate that it's possible to illustrate knowledge of a number with a property without revealing any information about the number, I hope you can accept that it's not impossible to do it for my toy example or for real practical examples. So the method we're going to use is we are going to convert the number to a polynomial. So the Bitcoin private key is, the private keys are 317 and 701. So we're just going to make those the coefficients of a polynomial. And we happen to get that 3x to the fifth, x to the fourth, 7x to the cube, 7x squared plus 1. And this polynomial's real root has only one real root, is negative 0.936352. So what we're going to show is the prover wants to show that she knows a fifth degree polynomial with that as a root without revealing the polynomial. So in our toy example, the prover wants to show she knows two numbers that multiply to that Bitcoin private key that has the appropriate balance, but we're going to show a different thing, how you would show that you know the numbers 317 and 701 without revealing them. And we're going to assume the property you want them to have is that the polynomial has that root rather than that they match something on the Bitcoin blockchain. This gives us our final crypto tool, homomorphic encryption. Also a very useful tool for lots and lots of problems. So a simple homomorphic encryption is to take any number, raise 5 to that power, and take the answer modulo 7. This, by the way, is working with integers. So for example, 4, we take 5 to the 4th power, take the answer 625 modulo 7, and we get 2. So 4 encrypts to 2. 7 encrypts to 5. We call this a homomorphic encryption because a property is preserved, and in particular, the property is that if I add the two numbers together, 4 and 7 to get 11, and I encrypt 11, it gives me if I encrypt 11, I get 3. 11 encrypts to 3. If I multiply the encryptions of 4 and 7 together, so I multiply the encryptions. So I added the numbers. I added 4 and 7, but I'm going to multiply the encryptions. I get, and I encrypt the result, I get the same answer. So the encryption of the sum of the numbers is equal to the encryption of the product of their encryptions. Why does this property matter? Well, this property matters because I can prove the polynomial without saying what it is. So the prover wants to show the fifth degree polynomial with the negative 0.93 root. And that is equivalent to saying the prover knows a fourth degree polynomial, which we will call P of X, multiplied by X plus the root. So, well, actually X minus the root, X plus 0.936352. So we can write the secret polynomial as a fourth degree polynomial times X plus 0.936352. And that fourth degree polynomial P of X is there on the bottom. The verifier is going to pick a secret homomorphic encryption scheme and secret number. So the prover does not know what the encryption scheme is or the number. And the prover is going to encrypt the first 5 powers of the secret number. So 5 squared, the first, they're going to pick 2. The first power of 2 is 2, 5 squared encrypts to 2 encrypts to 4, sorry, 5 squared encrypts to 4. 5 squared is 25, which encrypts to 4, which is 7, you know, when you take 4. When 25 modulo 7 is 4. 2 squared, 4 encrypts to 2. 2 cubed encrypts to 4. 2 to the 4th encrypts to 2, and 2 to the 32nd encrypts to 2. So the verifier sends 4, 2, 4, 2, and 2 to the prover and asks for the number of the value of the secret polynomial and P of X both. But instead of using X, X squared, X cubed, X fourth, and X fifth, use 4, 2, 4, 2, and 2. The prover evaluates the secret polynomial using the supplied values and gets the result 57. Evaluates P of X using the same way and gets 11.55 and returns 57 and 11.55 to the verifier. The verifier divides 55 by 11.55 to get 4.936352, which is the correct value of the encrypted value of 2, 4, plus the root. Now, in this particular case, it would be very easy for the prover to fake this. But with more complicated systems, the kind of people actually use, faking is computationally infeasible. The homomorphic encryption allows the the verifier can send in numbers, and the homomorphic property of the encryption guarantees that the ratio of the 2 answers it gets back are the same as the ratio if the secret polynomial and the P of X and the P of X had been evaluated with a non-encrypted value of X. So verification of assets will use some kind of homomorphic encryption checks, but the details will depend on how the blockchain assets are protected. Okay, now let's evaluate my toy example. I did fail. I did not quite achieve the goal. And by the way, if anybody wants to work on this problem and come up with an improved toy example that actually works with actual Bitcoin encryption and actually doesn't have these errors in it, I would really appreciate it. I would love to work with somebody on that. But this was the best I could do so far. It's not zero knowledge. It's limited knowledge, but customer A learns that there is one other customer and the balance of that customer. It doesn't know who that customer is, but it knows there's some other customer with that balance. And it also knows the sums and balances of other accounts. That seems pretty harmless for most purposes, but if you think about somebody opening up hundreds or thousands of accounts and pooling the number and cross-reference with other data, it could be used for somebody to discover something about account balances. So it's not zero knowledge. We call it limited knowledge proof. It is succinct, right? All the proof strings are reasonably short, even for very complicated financial institutions. It is interactive. The verifier had to send numbers to the prover and evaluate the response. A non-interactive proof the prover would be able to send out messages without any input from the verifier. And it is an argument of knowledge. The prover has proved two things. That, well, a couple of different ways to say it, but the prover has proved that it knows Bitcoin private keys that represent more Bitcoin, or at least as many Bitcoin as the account balances that are included in its proof. Just a quick thing, one problem with a ZK-SNARK proof is they have no legal standing, and there are people who would like to introduce rules that said if you check your ZK-SNARK proof, then you have a secured interest in the Bitcoin assets it represents. If some of those disappear, you might only get a pro rata return on it, but you stand ahead of everybody who isn't in the proof, which gives people a strong incentive to check their proofs, and it makes the thing meaningful. So the institution might go out and promise its assets to lots of people who are left off the proof. Legally, we would like those people who are not included in the proof, who should know that they have subordinate interests, we would like them to be behind in bankruptcy, the creditors who were improved in the proof. I have my doubts, given the many different legal jurisdictions involved, given that regulators and lawyers, for the most part, are not particularly technically savvy or crypto friendly. But I don't know that there'll be any progress in this anytime soon. There is a pure crypto solution, which is much more elegant, which says that as soon as, the first day that the institution can't provide the proof of solvency, its Bitcoin assets are automatically seized in smart contracts and distributed pro rata to the people from the last proof of solvency. That's very elegant and nice and whatever. It has some problems of its own, but that would be the elegant crypto solution to implementing this. Proof of solvency is more important for complex financial institutions. I chose a simple example, but we would love to know that more complex financial institutions have the cash they need to meet all their cash obligations, and also the equity they need to likely service their long-term obligations. Traditional financial institutions could use this either by putting their information on blockchains, which a lot of them were doing or talking about doing from like 2017 or so, but those projects seem to have died, or at least I don't hear much about them anyway. And the people I know who were working on them have moved on to other things. Or just authoritative ledgers. JP Morgan could say, here is an authoritative ledger. If you have the right key to access account information, you can come to this ledger and it's authoritative. If we say, if we say there's that much money in that account, we'll stand by that. And then there are many other examples of things people want cryptographic proof of without revealing private, proprietary information. How might this work? Well, the prover would have an icon on its homepage. Most people would ignore it, but some users would click on it to get a ZK-SNARK. The users would have a validation routine that they would run on their computer. So the ZK-SNARK is created on the custodian's computer. It's probably in the cloud, but on computers secured and controlled by the prover. But the user doesn't want to trust, doesn't want to put that into an algorithm they got from the prover. They want to get a trusted algorithm from an independent source, and they want to run the ZK-SNARK through the computer, given their account private key, and that will tell them whether or not the ZK-SNARK is a valid proof of solvency. And hopefully they will get a message that validates both that the prover is solvent and that the individual user's account balance is correct. From a prover's view, things are a lot more complicated. Not all institutions will be willing or able to produce these proofs. It requires very high level accounting controls, things that were absent in, well, FTX, for example, basically. But even in, traditional finance, at Signature Bank, at SVB, when they went down, people didn't know how much cash they had. People didn't know their exact assets and liabilities. Management didn't really know whether they were solvent or not. Many institutions are simply not solvent and never were, never intended to be. A lot of places are kind of solvent most of the time, but could not manage daily proofs. An example of this, I did a lot of work in the 90s with big major global financial institutions that had to put in capital systems that proved capital adequacy every day. And if they couldn't prove it, they didn't open. And it was an enormous challenge. Before that, they didn't know. They didn't really know if they were solvent every day. After that, with an invention, literally billions of dollars of investment, we built systems so that they could, in fact, know that they were solvent, at least in a regulatory capital sense, that they were solvent every day before opening for business. The initial effect of ZK-SNARKs is going to expose institutions that can't guarantee solvency for any of the reasons above, or just indifference. They don't, they tell their users, trust us, you don't need the proof. I think that will be, that will wash many of them out of business. I think that once people get aware that this stuff is possible, they're going to want it as a matter of course, and any institution that doesn't provide it will be highly suspect. So really, beyond the specific fact proven, the ZK-SNARKs demonstrate, well-managed, adequately financed organizations. You can't do a Z-SNARK proof if you're badly managed, if you have shaky finances. So even if nobody ever checked a proof, the fact that you can even produce a proof is a major source of security for customers. The basic math of this stuff goes back to the 1980s. People like Ron Rivest, Martin Helm, people who were doing cryptography and thinking about issues like this. The specific practical technologies are around 2015. That's when people started coming up with really practical, commercially viable solutions for these things. There's been a push. There's been a lot of people working on this. I've been working on related areas and gotten interested in it and looked at progress in this area. But it was clearly the 2022 crypto collapse that jump-started interest. I mean, that's why you're going to start seeing these things pop up in 2023. Not because the math got any better, not because there was any tremendous improvements in the technology, just because suddenly a lot of people realize they need this. It's a proven, tested solution. We're very fortunate that from 2015 to 2022, people had done the basic development work and written a lot of the code and, thrashed out some of the issues so that, there was a proven, tested solution. And there really is no viable alternatives that are shovel ready. There are a lot of other ways people have thought about these issues, but none of them are going to be, ready for several years anyway. Audit firms generally don't want to do the business and aren't equipped to it. And traditional financial solvency, the regulatory capital requirements, the rules, and so forth are looking very, very shaky, both in crypto and non-crypto. So I have a few concluding pieces of advice before taking questions. I advise everybody here who can follow this lecture at the level I've given it. If you can follow it at the level I've given it, you can do useful work in this area. That's both interesting theoretical, academic research, and that's commercial research. I mean, people are going to get rich doing this stuff, and it might as well be you. I think you got a real tailwind. There's lots and lots of interesting mathematical ideas that are going to pay big dividends, either in terms of knowledge or in terms of money in the next few years. But this is one where you got a big tailwind. For a broader level, for people who aren't particularly interested in doing that, Think about decentralized and protocols in general. Whenever you see a social problem, a political argument, a literary dilemma, a personal problem, think about a decentralized protocol that can cut through the things that people have forever thought of as, dilemmas, as trade-offs, as scales. Do the fair thing or do the legal thing. Well, we can do better. We can come up with a decentralized protocol that is more rational and coherent than the law and is more fair than the, sort of subtle social understanding. And these things are going to revolutionize human society. They're not just going to be a big factor in crypto finance or in traditional finance. Everything is going to suffer from replacing the traditional decentralized protocols and the traditional centralized protocols, each of which have major drawbacks, with perfect mathematical representations, with built-in game theory to be self-enforcing, non-violent, completely voluntary, that are far more efficient, far more civilized than alternatives. And even if you're not going to do that, prepare for it. I think there are going to be major changes in society. I think it's going to be a dramatic a change as from someone living in, pre-modern, prehistorical tribes where everything is done with decentralized protocols, everything is done by tradition, to a modern society in which most of the important protocols are centralized and written and backed by violence and argued over. I think the transition to decentralized, rational mathematical protocols is as big a change as that. And when people have done it, which could take a generation, they're going to look back on us today the way we look at sort of the cute people, prehistoric tribes doing their cute prehistoric tribe stuff. So that's all I've got to say. Do we have questions or comments?
Thank you very much for this, Aaron. Let me just